Welcome back, MTG Joe here. We are back with our Duskmourn review. We already covered the mythics. We are going to be covering the rares today, and we are going to slot them in terms of a tier list in what I think will see their playability. So we have S tier being the best, all the way down to EDH tier, where really they're not for constructed purposes. They're more multiplayer focused, EDH commander focused in that sense. So we're going to predominantly be looking at it from the focus of standard, but I will call out in instances where I think they could be pioneer, viable, or some of the extended arena formats, stuff of that nature. So the mythic video is also up on my playlist if you want to check that out. We're going to be covering them today from the rares. The one thing I do want to call out from the mythic video, for mythic spoiler, the glimmer foils of the enduring cycle, like the creatures that become enchantments, the rainbow versions are mythic, but the other ones are rare. So we're going to cover them again here, the rares. I'll unify the ratings between them. So when we get to them, we'll cover it from there. But there are 56 here. We're going to go group the lands, the rare lands in one cycle. But let's just jump into it and start going from there. So first up, we have Baldur's Strayed Worm, 5 mana, 5/5. Spell can't be countered, trample haste. So nice stats, all things considered, can't be countered. Very great text line against blue-based decks. And then it has Delirium, so if there's 4 or more card types in your graveyard, return the worm from the graveyard to the battlefield with finality counter, activate if there are only 4 or more counters. So the biggest thing here, the return from graveyard likely won't be huge in terms of impact, given Sunfall is so prevalent. There's a lot of exile-based removal. This card seems pretty reasonable in like against Golgari decks, the Dimir decks, like the black-based mid-range decks. Mono red will probably have a hard time dealing with something like this. And then it just comes back because usually the 5 damage removal spells out of red aren't exile-based. It's the 4 mana obliterating bolt style effects. So I think this card could be reasonable if we do see an uptick in counters, but even then we don't see too many counters. So I don't think the type line can't be countered is super relevant. I do think like Trample Haste 5/5, it can attack into Sheoldred profitably. Obviously, it has the Atraxa problem where it can't attack into Atraxa. If it can attack into Back God. So a lot of the bigger things, it still has the issue with Glissa. I think this card, if it were to see play, would be kind of in the B tier. I think it's not a card you build an entire deck around, but it is a card that's got good type lines. It could see play anytime there's something like can't be countered. You look at it compared to Thrun. Thrun has like indestructible, and then it can't kind of be countered, but it also doesn't have the haste or the trample. So it's kind of interesting in that lane. The next up is the land cycle. So these lands are, they tap for a color, and then they can activate to tap for a second color if you control a like alternative. So in this case here, swamp, and then if you control a mountain or swamp, it can activate for red as well. I think these cards are very useful. The big thing for certain decks, like for those who are familiar with the channel, like I love aggressive based decks. The Gruul deck in standard, while very strong, plays some awful lands like Thran Portal or like tap lands. The Gruul land in there will have a similar effect. You may have to configure your mana bases a bit. This isn't just a straight add 4 without tweaking things, because if you only have like 1 or 2 swamps, it does kind of have a limiting factor in terms of it. However, said that, I do think these are A tier, great to have. Anytime you can get lands, we will take them, especially playable untapped lands. So let's slot that in. And now we go to the rooms. So the room's unfamiliar. If you're unfamiliar, this is a new mechanic. You basically can cast both sides. So you cast one side as it comes in, and then later in the game, you can kind of unlock the other side. So the left side, the central elevator, 4 mana. When you unlock this door, search your library for a room card that doesn't have the same name as a room you control, reveal it. So not really relevant unless there's like a dedicated room kind of control deck. But even then, it's basically a 4 mana tutor. And then 3 mana at the beginning of your upkeep, surveil 1. You win the game if there are 8 or more different names among unlocked doors of rooms you control. So this is kind of a win condition in its own. It's like an alternative win condition. Is Room's Control going to be a thing? Maybe, but a lot of these, because you're getting flexibility in the spells, tend to be slightly overcosted from what I've seen thus far. This is probably D tier. People will play it because it's people like the alternative win conditions, but I don't think it is something that will see too much play. Now, it could be proven wrong. There could be a dedicated Room Control, but more likely than not, these are more the fun of. All right, Chainsaw time. 2 mana. When it enters the battlefield, deals 3 damage up to 1 target creature. So only creatures, not any target. So notable. So it's not going to replace something like a lightning strike. Whenever 1 or more creatures die, you put a rev counter on Chainsaw, and then equipped creature gets plus XO, where X is the number of rev counters. Equip 3. This is interesting. So it's a removal spell, 3 damage, covers a good chunk of like the aggressive base stuff. Obviously, sorcery speed makes it worse against like the prowess threats. A lot of them have haste, so you usually want instant speed removal. It doesn't scale up to hit Preacher, doesn't scale up to hit Shieldred. The equipped cost is fairly high, all things considered. You're paying a full turn to, at most, or the floor is kind of like you'd kill 1 creature, so it gets +1 in terms of power, so it's not huge. It is removal that can then be sacked to Rottenmouth Viper. Things like that nature. You can pick it up with Pixie, so we've seen some of these, not as efficient removal spells, but because they leave a spell, like a permanent behind, have some utility. I think this is probably C tier. It could play in like a Rottenmouth Viper deck. I don't think mono red aggro would pick it up. And there's not really equipment matters decks. If it was like auto equipped, if the equipped was like 1, then maybe, but the equipped is pretty expensive. So Come Back Wrong, 3 mana. Destroy target creature. If creature card was put in a graveyard this way, return it to the battlefield under your control, sacrifice at the beginning of your next end step. It's a very interesting card. So notably, right off the bat, let's highlight this, sorcery speed. Anytime you have sorcery speed removal, it does drop in terms of its viability. So when you're looking at this, I don't think this is a card you want in the against the aggressive decks. The rate's too slow, sorcery speed doesn't really help. This is something interesting against like Domain, anything with like heavy ETB style effects, like kill your opponent's Atalia or Atraxa, get that ETB even for the turn. If you do this pre-combat, now notably, it doesn't gain haste till end of turn. It just sacrifices it at the beginning of your next end step. So you don't get that value either. Probably not, like at most, maybe a sideboard card to get some utility, but I don't see it being huge. The rate's kind of high. Let's put this as a C tier. Cursed Recording, 4 mana. Artifact. Whenever you cast instant sorcery, you put a time counter on Cursed Recording. Then if there are 7 or more time counters on it, remove those counters and it deals 20 damage to you. And then whenever you cast your instant sorcery spell, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for that spell. Okay, so it's kind of you get value, but then you're kind of cursed in terms of you have to do it before you hit to 7. So you're kind of putting a clock on yourself in terms of copying instants and sorceries. You can copy like, I don't know, you could copy like World Soul Rage, stuff of that nature. You're not really going to want to copy Lightning Strikes. You can copy like the Seasons, but even then, I don't know if you really want to put that clock on yourself. Like for 4 mana, it doesn't do anything the turn it comes down. You can eventually get to the Chandra that doubles your spells without the downside, and it has more utility. I think this card's probably like EDH tiered to like D tiered. Let's put it in D. I don't think this is a very good card, because you're probably playing this in like a Storm Spellslinger deck, but even then, like it's only a single copy. It's not copy every spell, and then you, even with those, you can only cast really 7 spells before you 20 yourself. Dazzling Theater Prop Room. So creatures you cast have Convoke for 4 mana, and then for 3 mana you have Prop Room. Untap each creature you control during each other player's untap step. So with this, Convoke is usually out of cards at this time, or like 4 mana is very expensive to do nothing in the deck. Prop Room, There's very limited flash convoke. Now there's the new Emperor, or like the new Wandering, whatever it is, Wandering Emperor. That's a creature that can flash in. There's the 2 mana make 2 1/1s kind of effect, but there's not huge amounts. The untap during each other player's untap can have more utility, like in EDH, stuff like that. I don't think this card is very good in terms of what you're doing for like an aggressive deck that cares about Convoke. This is, honestly, this is probably EDH. What does this one look like? There's a lot of cards, so they get kind of small in terms. I had an EDH tier this one. I don't think this is meant for constructed play. Demonic Council. We got Demonic Tutor. 2 mana. Search your library for a demon card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. And then Delirium, if there are 4 more cards in your graveyard, instead search your library for any card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So it's going to really depend. The demon part, you're not really going to be playing it for that. It's how easy can you enable Delirium in the format. I think in Timeless, this could potentially see play as a second Demonic Tutor. It's fairly easy in those formats to enable Delirium. I think in Historic, so even something like Greasefang, for example, find the piece you're missing, find your Greasefang, always guarantee it, can have some utility in that regard. I think it all depends on Delirium. There's not really like demons you want to tutor, and if you're playing like a demon aggressive deck or mid-range, you're not going to spend 2 mana just to find a demon. And then even in like mid-rangey shells, just finding your silver bullet, stuff like that could have utility. Let's put this as a C tier. It has the potential to maybe be B. I actually think it might be B. Not so much standard base, but I think in like the extended formats, it could be a little bit better in terms of just being a tutor style effect for like combo decks. Dissection Tools. 5 mana. Enters the battlefield, you manifest Dread. So manifest Dread is basically morph. You flip top or 1 card from the top of your library, becomes a 2/2, and the other goes into your graveyard. So this is one way to kind of enable that Delirium. Then you attach Dissection Tool to it. It gets +2/2, Death Touch Lifelink, and the equipped cost is sacrifice a creature afterwards. This one's a little interesting. The rate's kind of poor for the first half. You're paying 5 mana for a 4/4 Death Touch Lifelink. Like okay rate, but like at 5 mana, it's a little bit much. The equip does require you to have enough fodder, so this could be like a sack enabler. It's technically a free sacrifice outlet as well, so if there's some sort of sack combo deck, it's fine. I don't think it's great. This is probably like C tier, D tier. It's not the worst card in the world. It's D tier. I don't think it's the best card in the world either. The rate's too expensive. If this was like 3 to 4 mana, and then even just like +1/1, it could be reasonable. But again, like with these, the thing that makes it most interesting is the equipped cost, because it could enable some shenanigans. All right, grab your gray merchants. We're going fishing, or not really. Doomsday Excruciator, 6 black mana. So you're clearly gonna splash this in your domain decks. Kidding. Flying enters the battlefield. If they cast, each player exiles all but the bottom 6 cards of their library face down. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card. So Doomsday is a deck in Legacy and Vintage. The Doomsday card basically does a similar effect where you could arrange, you basically choose 6 cards, arrange them in the order you want, and that's the remaining of your deck. Basically set up in a way where you can win the game that turn. You set up some draw conditions into Thassa's Oracle. We don't have Thassa's Oracle in Standard. We don't have a like Jace, you win the game that way. This has to be cast. It's very difficult to cast in this set. And there's not a way to necessarily force your opponent to draw cards. So you'd basically have to win the game kind of out of there. I don't think this card is very good in the format like Standard. There could potentially be a way to break it in other formats, but again, like because you don't get to choose the cards, you're basically just taking a chance. Like you would have to find a way to Excruciator and then mill them in the same accord, which is going to be difficult to do. I think this card is D tier. I'm definitely going to open it up on my pre-release, and I'm never going to be able to cast it. All right, so we had our first of the Enduring. Like I said, we covered these in the Mythics because the Glimmer Foil Pokemon VMAX versions, for some reason, are flagged as Mythic, like these ones here. So your Flareon VMAX is like that. So I had this one here as a C. This card here, whenever a creature you control, another creature enters the battlefield, gets +2/0 and gains haste till end of turn. When it dies, it becomes an enchantment with the same effect. 4 mana, 3/3, doesn't do anything the turn it comes down, is too slow. The 3/3 stats is pretty low for this effect. If it itself had haste, it could be reasonable. The only deck that maybe would see this is Convoke as kind of a top end, and then it's basically like, is it better than any other 3-drops? I don't think so. So I have this one as a C tier. So let's pop you in. Enduring Curiosity, 4 mana, 4/3. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So it's Gix's effect without the drawback of gaining or losing life. Flash, I think, is super reasonable here. And then when it dies, it becomes an enchantment with that. 4/3 as opposed to 3/3. The Flash makes it, I think, a lot more viable. Just being able to like end step it. There's a lot of cheap like blue-black or white-blue flyers, so it's a way to kind of poke your opponent, get some tempo elements out of it. So you 1-drop flyer, 2-drop bat, and then attack in. This flashes in, so you can get some value. You can play counterspell. Opponent doesn't do anything. Flash it in. I think this one is a lot more constructed viable. I'm gonna give this one a B tier. I might knock down this Baldur's Stride. Enduring Innocence. So we had this one covered. I had this one as B tier. I think it's really going to depend if White Weenie style strategies play in effect. So lifelink 2/1 for 3, not the best rate. Whenever one or more other creatures you control power 2 or less enter, draw a card. This triggers only once per turn. So unlike the blue one that's uncapped, you can draw as many cards as you can deal damage. This one is once per turn. If you have a way with like making tokens on your opponent's turn, which we do in a number of lines, Myrex, Fountain Port has a lot of utility. I think like as a 3-drop, we've seen Welcoming Vampire see some play at times, stuff of that. If there is like a white-based aggro deck, I think this can be fine in it as something to definitely at least try out. So we'll put it in there at the B slot. Enduring Tenacity. So 4 mana, 4/3. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. When it dies, you get the same effect. I don't think this one is like super useful. Like you have to build very much the life gain deck. So you're playing like the black-white life gain, maybe bat focused, but at that point, like, are you playing this over Beza? Like, what are you doing in that regard? So I don't think this is like super useful. I have this one as a C. More like an EDH card style thing. Like these effects, I think this card will be popular. People love these types of effects. But it's not like the best in terms of that sense. So then we have Enduring Vitality, 3 mana, 3/3 Vigilance. Creatures you control basically tap for any mana. Again, when I made the comment here, I don't know what you're necessarily ramping into. You're overcommitting into like board position potentially. But really it's like, okay, what are we ramping into? You're not going to necessarily go Atraxa, maybe, but like, are you going to play like a Dork package? So the Domain package tends to be a little bit more resilient. Like, there's a lot of sweepers in the format. I think this is more Commander-esque in nature, or just fringe if you want to ramp. I have this as a D tier. In like other formats, we have like the 1 mana enchantment Chrysalis Rites that doesn't see any play. This just costs more. Entity Tracker. So our first blue Enchantress. 3 mana, 2/3 flash, reasonable all things. Whenever an enchantment you control enters, or whenever a room fully unlocks, draw a card. So not once per turn, enchantments or rooms. I think the room part will be less relevant. The enchantment part, super reasonable. This effect is usually tagged to white creatures. There's a lot of incidental enchantments. You can play like blue-white caretakers, draw you more cards there. It draws off like any of those cheap leyline binding. It can draw cards off of. So it's kind of in that range. Depends how much like the rooms to really kind of push this up. There's a lot of reasonable words here that at least is worth trying in some sort of engine. This could be an engine. It's a little soft. I think this has some potential, but probably B tier at best. The body's a little fragile, but the flash gives it some ability to at least sneak in. So at the very least, it might replace itself. FOMO time. 2 mana, 2/3, Fear of Missing Out, enchantment creature nightmare. So this typing is really important for Delirium decks. Just counting as 2 on its own, very important. So enters the battlefield, discard, then draw a card. So the sequencing here is very important because if you're Hellbent, you have no cards in hand, you discard, and then you draw a card. So you basically just draw a card. So late game, this just draws you a card when you're out of cards. And then with Delirium, you basically get an extra combat step, which for red-based aggro decks can be huge. Power up your Slick Shot or whatever, then you get 2 combat steps. As a red mage, loving this. This to me is A tier. Dare I say, I might give this S tier. I think this is like a lot of what you want to be doing in red. It can enable play you into reanimator decks as a looting style effect. It can fix your early draws if you need to hit land and stuff like that. I really like. I'm putting it. We got an S tier, folks. Might be my mono red bias, but this one in particular, let me know if you disagree. So then we have Ghostly Dancers. 5 mana, 2/5. Flying, enters the battlefield, return an enchantment from your graveyard to your hand, or unlock a locked door of a room you control. So this can be pretty impactful for the more expensive doors. It has Eerie. Whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, create a 3/1 white spirit creature. So we spoke earlier about potentially like a rooms control deck. This is a way to kind of rebuy effects. The unlocking could have some value. It's a win condition on its own. Again, just with like enchantments, in like a Caretaker's Talent deck, this kind of enables. Caretaker's Talent would trigger this. This would trigger Caretaker's Talent. So there's a lot of utility in that sense. I think this is a solid, like, I'm going to give this A, I think. I think this card's really strong. Like, in itself, it's got effects right when it comes to play. It has ongoing effects as a win condition. The 2/5 is reasonable stats. I think it's a good card. This is a good card. Ghost Vacuum. 1 mana. Exile target card from a graveyard. So, Graveyard Hate. It is no mana to activate. It is a crime enabler, which has value in that sense. And then late game, it's kind of a win condition. 6 mana, you sacrifice it, you put each creature card with Ghost Vacuum onto the battlefield under your control. Each of them is a 1/1 spirit in addition to its other type. Activate only as a sorcery. I think this card is really solid. Even just like a 1/1 Atraxa, any sort of creatures can give you value that way there. It helps you control and then can be a win condition. So let's put the Ghost Vacuum. I'm giving that one an A. Grievous Wound. 5 mana. Enchant player can't gain life. Whenever enchant player is dealt damage, they lose half their life rounded up. This card is way too expensive for this type of effect. If you're paying 5 mana to do this, it's just not something that I would play. This is EDH tier. Edge Shredder. So this one is a really interesting one. 4 mana, 5/5. Whenever it attacks, you may mill 2 cards. Delirium Enabler. Whenever one or more lands is put into your graveyard from your library, put them onto the battlefield instead. So this is whenever, not when it mills, is at any point. So there's a lot of decks like the Golgari Lens combo, Analyst decks, anything like that. Even like think of it in Greasefang, where you're milling yourself. You could just hard cast Parhelion. Crew 1, another super reasonable kind of effect there. Crew 1 is very cheap for a 5/5. This dodges sort like Sunfall, so you can then at least attack through it the following turn. This, I think, is a very strong card. There's also a sub-theme in the deck where creatures, if they're tapped, it has additional effects. So this kind of plays really nicely with the vehicles. I think Head Shredder is definitely up there. I'm giving it an S tier. Let's lock it in, folks. S tier. Kona, Rescue Bestie. A Beastie Bestie. 4 mana, 4/3. Survival is the mechanic I was just mentioning. At the beginning of your second main phase, if it is tapped, you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. So in Foundations, they've already announced that we're getting Omniscience. We also have Llanowar Elf. So you could potentially turn 3 get Omniscience into play, which is pretty sweet. I think this is kind of a product of how consistent are you able to do it with the existence of other cards. Is it, if we're cheating in Atraxa, we're cheating in Atali, like what are the biggest things we could cheat in? This is just a permanent, so that's something like that. The body's pretty soft. It does need to get to that second main phase if they don't kill it. I think this has some potential. I think it's really, it's a tool in a broader sense where it's contingent on how good the other big things are, and then how consistent is this at getting into play like Atraxa versus like the other effects. This is probably, I want to say A tier. It has the potential. Like this could be either like broken or unplayable, but I would hedge just with the ease at which you can put stuff into play, give it a little bit higher of a rating. So we got a new Leyline cycle coming in. So Leyline of Hope. So with the Leylines, if they're in their opening hand, you get to put them onto the battlefield without casting. So we want to assess this in 2 capacities. Sorry about the dogs. Give me 1 sec. Yeah, so you want to assess, obviously, if they're in play for free, they're a lot better than if you have to cast them. So what's the downside of casting them later? The Leyline of Hope is a life gain focus, so if you gain life, you gain that much +1, and then it is like the Righteous Valkyrie effect. If you have at least 7 or more starting life, your creatures get a bonus. I think this is pretty reasonable in the sense of the life gain decks, because you're naturally kind of doing that. And then even if you have to cast it for 4 mana, it's just like an Anthem effect. You get the residual benefit afterwards. Even it would trigger, like you could cast it if you have a lifelink creature, then you gain the extra life. I think this one, if there's like the continuation of the life gain decks, can be a reasonable kind of top end Anthem. I would put this as a B tier. Sorry, we're watching dogs and they protect the block, and no matter how much I try to escape them, they're here. Leyline of Mutation. So I think this one is garbage. 4 mana. Basically, you may pay Wooburg as opposed to paying the mana cost for a spell. Does nothing if you draw it late. If you're paying this for 4, okay, what? You can, if you have Wooburg on 5, you can cheat in Atraxa. There's a lot more consistent ways. Does nothing to turn if you're paying 4 mana for it. This is maybe EDH focused. I wouldn't play this in any constructed. Like with the white one has utility to cast, this one has nothing. So this enables a turn 2 combo or combo-esque win in standard. I have a video up, a YouTube short explaining how it works, but it's basically a mono red aggro deck. So you get to play turn 0. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets a single creature you control, copy that spell. You may choose new copies. Double Monstrous Rage, double Felonious Rage. There's a new one that pumps 3/0. Any sort of effect like that doubles up. You have Heartfire Hero as well as Scamp that can both kind of deal extra damage to your opponent. So this is a very strong one. It might be a little soft. Casting for 4 mana, obviously not as good, but still, like the upside of this just allows you to have such explosive draws. I'm going to put this in A tier. I might be wrong. Might be too glass cannony, but it's got a very, very high ceiling in terms of its effectiveness with a deck that's already fairly popular in Standard and Pioneer. Leyline of the Void, this is a reprint, very strong sideboard card. So if card would be put into opponent's graveyard, it goes to exile instead, leaves your graveyard behind. Obviously, it's much better in your opener than casting it later. Notably, when you cast it later, it would be only subsequent cards that go in the graveyard. It's not the existing cards. So the thing is, it's not like Rest in Peace that would clean up the graveyard. This one, it's really just contingent on what graveyard decks look like, with Delirium seeming to be more of a theme. I think this could be a B. Like, if you need graveyard hate, this is a really good graveyard card. Sees play all the way back to like extended formats. Leyline of Transformation. 4 mana comes into play. It's basically like choose a creature type. Your creatures are the other types. I don't really think this is that relevant. EDH, like, these effects never seem relevant, and to dedicate an entire ley line to this, or like an entire 4 mana spell, it's just not needed in Constructed. Marina Vendrell, Wooburg. Enters battlefield, reveal top 7 cards of your library, put all enchantments from among them into your hand and the rest of the bottom of your library in random order. Lock or unlock a door of target room you control. Activate only as a sorcery. So this lets you read. So first off, it could be huge card advantage, building enchantment-based kind of themes. You can lock or unlock a door, so it gets you to rebuy effects, which has a lot of value as well. If there is like an enchantment control deck, an enchantment mid-range deck, this is a pretty big engine. You obviously have to play multicolor, which hasn't proven to be completely out of line. Like, we have the domain decks. There's a lot of ways to kind of establish the mana that way there. Enchantments are fairly powerful. I think this could be quite a strong card. Just the fact it could draw you, even if it draws you 2 to 4 cards off it, it's pretty big just for a 5 mana spell. So pretty sweet card. Let's put her. You give her a B. Seemingly a little bit more generous than the mythics. A lot of these rares seem better than the mythics. All right, Marina Vendrell's Grimoire. So her book, 6 mana, already seems pretty expensive. So when it enters, if you cast it, you draw 5 cards. So you can't cheat into play, so it loses some of that value. You have no maximum hand size, and you don't lose the game for having 0 or less life. Whenever you gain life, draw that many cards. Whenever you lose life, discard that many cards. If you have no cards in your hand, you lose the game. So it's like a Lich's Mastery style thing. If it exists, it would be some sort of combo deck. I think this is more EDH focused. Marvin Murderous Mimic. Some alliteration there. 2 mana, 2/2. Enter. So it has all activated abilities of all creatures you control that don't have the same name as this creature. So we've had Agatha Soul Cauldron. There's the merfolks that can go infinite with each other. You can tap and tap it. There's a whole bunch of different effects here. In extended formats, this can have a lot of utility. Thinking of Pioneer, there's the Tree of Perdition combo that kind of enables itself, which is kind of cool. So this just being Tree of Perdition. So it has all activated creatures you control. So the creatures do have to be in play, but this is kind of just another enabler in those similar effects. I think this has pretty high potential. I think this could be an A. Like, it's either going to be an A or like a D. It's either going to be a combo enabler or just not see play at all. So with these, I usually hedge on it being a little bit better and then see if it being worse after. It's just, there's kind of decks around this theme, and this is just a redundant combo piece, I would think. Nashi, Searcher in the Dark, 2 mana menace for 2/2. Whenever deals combat damage to a player, you mill that many cards. You may put any number of legendary or enchantment cards from among them into your hand. If you put no cards in your hand, you put a 1/1 counter. So at the very least, this scales and gets bigger. It could be some card advantage. Has pseudo evasion with the menace. We've seen some of these Dimir kind of tempo-ish decks in the past. They do play a number of legendaries with like Gix, Shieldred, Back God, so it's a way to kind of enable there. It's a way to enable Delirium if that's a way you want to go. I think this is a solid B tier card. We're getting there, folks. There is a lot of rares. Ominous Flytrap, 3 mana, Delirium. Whenever it enters or attacks, if there are 4 or more cards amongst the cards in your graveyard, distribute 2 1/1 counters among of. So it could become If you have Delirium, it's a 3 mana 4/6. If there are 6 or more card types among the cards in your graveyard, double the amount. It's fine. It's just like a green kind of beater. There's no trample, there's no evasion. It could play into like a counters theme. We usually have these 3 mana kind of put counters on stuff. Probably D tier. Doesn't do. It's just a creature. Like, it's probably good and limited, just being a big body, but not enough on its own. Peer, Past the Veil. 4 mana, discard your hand, then draw X cards, where X is the number of card types amongst your graveyard. So, like, late game. So, assume you have Delirium, it's draw 4. So, you'd have to kind of draw 4. I don't know. Maybe. I'm thinking, like, you'd have to draw at least 4 for 4 for it to be useful. Are you discarding your hand that you care? Probably D tier. Like, it could be in a combo-esque deck. Care about something like that, but probably not the best. All right. Razorkin Needlehead. 2 mana, 2 red. Has first strike as long as it's your turn. Whenever opponent draws a card, deals 1 damage. So, against Caretaker's Talent decks, stuff like that. Pings them for some extra against control decks. It's probably only going to see play in red-based. Could be a sideboard card in that regard. I mean, it's kind of like a Bowmaster style effect. Obviously, you don't get the other additional effect, but could be super reasonable. Probably B. See, I'm not just putting all red cards as S tier. Reluctant Role Model. 2 mana. It's got survival. At the beginning of your second main, if it is tapped, put a flying lifelink or 1/1 counter on it. So this just kind of keeps getting bigger each turn as you attack. Nice on curve. Human subtype, which is really important for like Pioneer humans or extended formats. Whenever it or another creature you control dies, if it had counters on it, put those on up to another creatures. So it kind of moves them around, which is really useful. This card is, I think, very strong for white-based creature aggro. I'm going to give it an A. Restricted Office. So 4 mana, when you unlock the store, destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater, and then other permanents you control have hexproof. This first, like the left side is what you kind of want in a white weenie deck. 4 mana is pretty heavy, like maybe as a sideboard option against like Domain, stuff of that nature. The Lecture Hall, you're never really going to do. 7 mana. This is probably like D tier. Rip Spawn Hunter. 4 mana, 4/4 survival. At the beginning of your second main, Rip Hunter is tapped. Reveal X top X cards of your library where X is its power. Put any number of creatures or vehicle cards with different powers from among them into your hand. This is a really nice card advantage as kind of a top end. A lot of times these white-based aggro decks can run out of gas. This naturally wants you to attack, which has some value. Works really nice with vehicles to kind of curve out, get you some card advantage. I think this could be a B tier. Or B is pretty high. I guess I gotta be more, I don't know. I might be too optimistic, but I think these cards are reasonable. Roaring Furnace, Steaming Sauna. 2 mana. Whenever you unlock the store, this room deals damage equal to the number of cards in your hand to target creature an opponent controls. And then you have no max hand size. Beginning of your end step, draw a card. This could be see play in a is it kind of or like blue red X control deck. We've seen Fires of Victory get played. Obviously, being instant has more value. It can also replace itself. The Sauna is a way late game. You can kind of just, if you have nothing better to do, or if you kind of have control, just sink mana into it. Probably reasonable. Probably not the best. I would say C tier. Kind of where it just falls, where it's like, yeah, I could see it, but also I could see it not. Silent Hall Creeper. 2 mana, 1/1, can't be blocked. Whenever it deals combat damage to player, you choose one that hasn't been chosen. You put a counter on it, you draw a card, becomes a copy of another target creature you control. So this becomes, after one attack, it becomes an unblockable 3/3 that then draws you a card and then can clone something. Doesn't loot, but kind of reasonable on its own. Plays really nice with like Gix or anything that cares about card draw. Dealing combat damage. I think this is B tier. split up because what we needed was more white sweepers. You get to choose one for 3 mana. Destroy all tapped creatures, destroy all untapped creatures. So things with vigilance kind of get a boost, get attack, and then they don't die. Against convoke, stuff like that. This will be an annoying card for sure. This probably A tier. The Jolly Balloon Man. 3 mana, 1/4 haste. You create a token copy of another target creature you control, except it's a 1/1 red balloon with flying and haste. Sack it. So it's basically Reflection of Kiki, but now you have to pay a mana. So you can't use it on curve necessarily. It's basically a 4 mana spell. So what are you kind of cloning? It could be target creature. So it gets around the legendary condition. So you at least get enter the battlefield effects. Probably a C. I'm just thinking like if it was obviously like Fabled exact, then it'd be a little bit better. The Mind Skinner. 3 blue, 10/1. Can't be blocked. The source would deal damage to an opponent, prevent that damage, and each opponent mills that many cards. Kind of a mill enabler. It's a 6-turn clock. Very, very fragile, obviously. The power doesn't really matter. Maybe a fling deck as like an alt. Callous Sellsword Fling the Mind Skinner. Kind of cool. But probably D tier. Just not that useful. Swarm Weaver. 4 mana. Legendary artifact creature. So artifact and creature subtype. When it enters, create 2 black 1 insect tokens with flying. So it's a 4 mana 2/3, and then you get 2 1/1s with flying, which is pretty reasonable across the body spread as long as and then if you have Delirium, it is an anthem for your tokens, and then they get Death Touch as well. Pretty reasonable card. C tier probably. I think C. It's a little soft, all things, because you have to compare it to like Sheoldred, Archfiend of Dross, stuff in that vein if you're playing Golgari colors. Tale of Tameo. 3 mana. You have a Saga, mill 2 cards. If 2 cards that share a card type that were milled this way, draw a card and repeat this process. Do it 3 times, then exile any number of instants or sorceries or Tameo Planeswalkers. Copy them. You may cast any number of copies. This card's really hard to evaluate. Like, how consistent will it be? It does okay the turn you use it, but like not huge impact to the board, especially against aggressive formats. Can be a combo enabler. Things like Storm. Probably C tier. Just kind of hedge. I don't know. Could be very good. Could be completely unplayable. It's tough to judge those ones without kind of running them through. Toby Beastie Befriender. 3 mana, 1/1. When enters, create a 4/4 beast token with this creature can't attack or block alone as long as you control 4 more tokens. Creature tokens you control have flying. So notably, it's not a legendary token. So with Caretakers, you could copy it, and then that would allow you to have 2 so they can enable each other. The flying still seems pretty solid, all things considered. This one's pretty strong. Like, the bodies are reasonable on its own. Let's put it as B tier. Twitching Doll, 2 mana. So 2 mana ramp for 2/2. You put an S counter, then you could sacrifice the Twitching Doll. You create a 2/2 spider with reach counter for create a 2/2 spider with reach for each counter on Twitching Doll. So this is each type of counter, not just the counters itself. So if you have other types of counters, it's pretty big. It's early ramp. That late game could be a payoff kind of effect. So it has utility kind of in that range. These effects are a little bit slow at times just because you are playing Sunfall. We have a number of 2 mana dorks, very seldomly see play. I think this is C tier. Undead Sprinter, 2 mana, 2/2, trample haste. You may cast it from your graveyard if a non-zombie creature died this turn. If you do, it enters with a 1/1 counter. Maybe like Rakdos Sacrifice, but a lot of them now are Yurga combo decks in Pioneer. Like, you'd be post-combat, so a lot of times the haste doesn't matter as much. Probably C tier. Just kind of thinking like the viability. Unholy Annex Ritual Chamber. So 3 mana, beginning of your end step, draw a card. If you control a demon, each opponent loses 2 life. Otherwise, sorry. Yeah, so if you have a demon, they lose 2, you gain 2. Otherwise, you lose 2 life. So it's card advantage every turn at the beginning of your end step. And then when you unlock the store, you create a demon with flying. I mean, I'd be happy in draft to have this, but I don't think it's going to do too much. Pretty slow, all things considered. Like maybe against control, kind of redundancy, but we have Phyrexian Arena, and that barely saw play. Unidentified hover ship. The aliens. 3 mana, 2/2, enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target creature with toughness 5 or less. When it leaves, then the exile card owner manifests dread. So the nice thing here is it doesn't give the card back. It doesn't hit Atraxa though. So it hits Sheoldred, most of the smaller stuff. They do manifest dread over the card, so it has some utility. It crews fairly cheap, but the body's pretty fragile. It can't be hit off things like Collected Company or that. It's probably like C tier. Like itself doesn't get hit by Sunfall, but it's pretty weak. Unstoppable Slasher, 3 mana, 2/3 Death Touch. When it deals combat damage to a player, they lose half their life rounded up. When it dies, if it has no counters on it, returns to the battlefield and there's control. Pretty sticky threat. Again, the problem is a lot of the removal is exile based. The Death Touch makes it kind of awkward with your opponent blocking. Can take huge chunks of life out of them. I think this is like a reasonable card. D-ish tier. So Valgoth's Lair. They put so many safety valves on this. So it's an enchantment land. So it's Delirium, pretty nice. Enters the battlefield tapped, basically unplayable then. And you choose a color and it adds color of any color of that color. So it's not rainbow, it's just you choose the color. It's like another one of these Thran portals where they put too many restrictions on it to be good because they're worried about the typing. This card is D-tiered. Valgavoth's Onslaught. Green and 2x, you manifest Dread X times, then put X 1/1 counters on each of those creatures. Could be a big top end card, just giving you a whole bunch of value. Potentially be like a control style shell, domain, but I'd probably just rather play Doppelgang in that case. It basically exposes you a turn to Sunfall. It gets rid of cards from your library, probably D tier. Again, like another card I wouldn't hate it in draft, but it's a lot of mana and there's better kind of mana sinks. Victor Valgavoth, I can't even say that. 1 in Orzhov, Eerie, whenever an enchantment you control enters, or whenever you fully unlock a room, surveil 2 if this is the first time this ability is resolved. If it's the second time, each opponent discards a card. If it's the third time, you put a creature from the graveyard. I don't know how consistently you're going to be multi-spelling with this. It's likely just going to be the trigger once, so then it's surveil 2, which is pretty weak. I think this is D tier. You have to have a lot of cheap enchantments, and this isn't really like you'd have to play it with Enchantress and stuff like that. Waltz of Rage. 5 mana, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature until the end of turn. Whenever a creature you control dies, exile the top card of your library and may play it till the end of next turn. This means your creature can't get hit by something in red. Like how much is it going to be dealing? Like your red creatures aren't huge. This is EDH fodder. We're almost there, folks. 2 more. Winter Misanthrope, whatever, guide. 1 in Jund, Ward 2, beginning of your upkeep, each player draws 2 cards. As long as there are 4 more card types in your graveyard, each opponent hits maximum hand size equal to 7 minus the number of those card types. So you have Delirium, their max hand size is 3. It does make it so like Ward makes it a little bit difficult to kill on curve, potentially. Plays nice with that red 2-drop. Probably more commander focus card with like various kind of hate pieces, Bowmaster, stuff like that. Like Underworld Dreams, probably D tier for constructed. Giving your opponent cards isn't usually the best idea. And lastly, Zimone, all questioning. 3 mana with Simic, 1/1. At the beginning of your end step, if a land enters the battlefield under your control this turn and you control prime number of lands, create Primo, Indivisible, a legendary 0/0 fractal with that many counters. So you have 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, yada, yada. So really, it's like 2, 3, 5, 7. So the thing is, like, I guess on curve it would work that you get a token that becomes a 3/3. So you kind of evaluated that. It's a 3 mana 1/1 that then gets a 3/3. That if it gets killed, then you have on to turn 5, but it doesn't do much after that. So this is D tier. All right, folks. So we are wrapped up our S tiers, Fear of Missing Out, and the green vehicle. We got some lands, some good spells in the A, good chunk in B and C tier, and then we got the draft chaff. Let me know what you think, if you disagree, if you agree, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.